It's theirs now. You're not allowed here." My daughter, Victoria, said those words while I held the key to the beach house in my hands, the same key I'd carried in my purse for 40 years, like a little key to happiness. I was standing in the doorway of my own home, looking at my daughter, who had just arrived with Marcus and his sister Julia. They wore serious faces, far too formal for a family visit. Victoria was wearing that green dress I bought her for her birthday, but now it looked like the uniform of an executioner. "What are you talking about, honey?" I asked, though a pit in my stomach already knew the answer. I had noticed the strange looks over the past few weeks, the conversations that stopped when I entered a room, the documents Marcus would quickly put away when I came near. "The beach house. Mom," Victoria said in a voice that sounded rehearsed, as if she'd practiced these words in the mirror. "We already transferred it. It belongs to Marcus's family now. They'll get more use out of it than you." The key slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a metallic clink that rang out like a funeral bell. Marcus bent down to pick it up, but I was faster. I clenched it in my fist, feeling the cold metal grow warm with the heat of my rage. "My father left me that house," I murmured, my voice coming out hoarse. "It's the only thing I have left of him." "Mom, don't be so dramatic," Victoria sighed, as if I were the one being irrational. "At your age you don't need a beach house. What do you want it for? To go watch the sea all by yourself?" "It's sad, Mom, very sad." Julia nodded enthusiastically, as if my daughter had just said something profound. Marcus kept that uncomfortable smile he always wore when he knew he was doing something wrong, but had no intention of stopping. "Besides," Victoria continued, "we have 4 kids and they have grandchildren. The house will have life in it again. It'll be useful. Not like now, empty most of the year, because you hardly ever go. Hardly ever go." That lie hit me like a slap in the face. I went to that house every weekend, every holiday, every time the weight of loneliness became too much for my shoulders. It was my sanctuary, my place of peace, the place where I talked with my father's memories and felt less alone in a world that felt stranger every day. "The papers are already signed," Marcus added, speaking for the first time. His voice was almost apologetic, but his eyes had the glint of someone who just won the lottery. "It's all legal, all in order. Don't you worry about a thing." "Don't worry." As if my worrying was the problem here. As if my pain was a minor inconvenience to be smoothed over with reassuring words. "How?" was all I could ask. "How did you sign the papers if the house is in my name, Victoria?" Victoria and Marcus shared a look that lasted only a second, but it told me everything. There was something else. "Well," Victoria said, fiddling with her purse strap, "technically the house is still in your name, but we have a power of attorney you signed last year when you were sick. Remember we told you it was to help with your banking?" My world collapsed. I remembered that day when I had that terrible pneumonia and Victoria came with papers saying it was to make it easier to pay for my medications and handle the health insurance. I had signed without reading, trusting my daughter as I had my entire life. "You used my illness," I whispered. It wasn't a question but a terrible confirmation. "Don't be melodramatic, Mom," Victoria snapped impatiently. "We're helping you. At your age, owning a property like this is a burden. Now you can live peacefully without worrying about maintenance, taxes, all those things you can't handle alone anymore. Julia smiled and placed a hand on Victoria's arm in a supportive gesture. Victoria is right, Mrs. Eleanor. You've done your part. You raised your daughter. You lived your life. Now it's time for the younger generation to enjoy what you built. The younger generation. Marcus was 44 and Julia was 40. I was 68, but I felt more alive than any of them. Yet to them, I was just an obstacle, standing between their ambition and my assets. Mom. Victoria put her hand on my shoulder, and her touch burned like a hot iron. Don't make that face. You know you can always come visit us here. This is still your house. My house, this house where I had raised Victoria, cried for her father, celebrated every achievement, and soothed every defeat. Now they were offering it to me as a favor, as if I were a guest of their generosity. I understand, I said finally, my voice so calm it surprised even me. Victoria blinked, clearly expecting a different reaction. Marcus visibly relaxed. Julia smiled in triumph. But I just smiled back, a small, quiet smile that seemed to say I accepted my fate. They couldn't know that smile hid something else entirely. It's fine, I added, slipping the key into my pocket. If that's what you've decided, I guess there's nothing more to say. The shock on their faces was obvious. They had come prepared for a battle, and I was giving them a surrender that seemed way too easy. But 68 years of life had taught me that the most effective battles are the ones the enemy never sees coming. They're moving in next Saturday, Victoria added, as if to make sure I fully understood. Marcus already spoke with a moving company. They're bringing all their things early in the morning. I nodded slowly, keeping that serene smile that seemed to reassure them so much. Inside something was breaking, but it wasn't my heart. It was the last chain tying me to the naive belief that family always protects you, that a daughter's love is unconditional. And my things? I asked with genuine curiosity, as if it were a practical question with no emotional weight. What things, Mom? Victoria frowned, confused by my calm demeanour. Well, the house has furniture, decorations, my grandmother's china, the curtains I embroidered myself, the paintings. I listed them slowly, watching their expressions gradually change. Marcus cleared his throat. Well, we thought it would be easier if everything just stayed there, you know, so the family can use the house right away without having to buy all new stuff. Julia nodded eagerly. Yes, Mrs. Eleanor, it would be a shame to dismantle such a well-organized home. Besides, where would you even put all that stuff? This house is already full. I looked around my living room, filled with decades of accumulated memories. But they didn't understand that every piece in that beach house had a story, had been chosen by me, paid for with my money, placed with my own hands. You're right, I said finally, and I saw them relax again. It would be complicated to bring everything here. Victoria smiled for the first time, a genuine smile that reminded me of the little girl she used to be. I'm glad you understand, Mom. I knew you'd be reasonable. Reasonable. That word echoed in my mind as I walked them to the door. I said goodbye to each of them with a kiss on the cheek, as if it were just another afternoon, as if they hadn't just come to steal 40 years of my memories. When they closed the door, I stood in the entryway for several minutes, listening to their footsteps fade away. Then I walked to the window and watched them get into Marcus's car. Victoria glanced back once, and for a moment I thought she might come back, that she had regrets, but she just waved casually before getting in. I watched them drive off until the car disappeared. Only then did I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. But I didn't cry, not yet. I walked to my room and pulled an old shoebox from under the bed where I kept my important documents. With trembling hands, I found the deed to the beach house. The date clearly stated the property was transferred to my name on March 15th, 1984, when my father died. It had been mine for 41 years, and now the doorbell startled me. I quickly put the papers away and went to open it, hoping it was a repentant Victoria. But it was George, my lifelong neighbour, a 64-year-old man who had been friends with my late husband. "Eleanor," he said, his wrinkled face full of concern. "I saw Victoria and her husband were here. You looked so pale when you saw them off. Is everything okay?" George had that special ability of some older folks to read the pain on others' faces. We had shared decades of secrets over the fence, and he'd known Victoria since she was a mischievous girl stealing mangoes from his tree. "Come in, George," I said, stepping aside. "Do you want some coffee?" "Only if it's no trouble," he replied, but he was already walking toward the kitchen, as he had hundreds of times before. As I made the coffee, I told him everything, every word, every look, every gesture. George listened in silence, nodding occasionally, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "That can't be legal," he muttered when I finished. "A power of attorney can't be used to transfer real estate without your explicit consent. How do you know that? When my sister died 3 years ago, I had to deal with all that legal paperwork. I learned more than I ever wanted to about wills and property." He rubbed his grey beard thoughtfully. "Eleanor, you need to talk to a lawyer." I shook my head. "George, I'm 68 years old. Am I going to fight my own daughter, drag her to court? In the end, for what? So she'll hate me even more than she already seems to." "She doesn't hate you," George said forcefully. "Victoria is confused, manipulated by that husband of hers. But this isn't hate, Eleanor. This is pure and simple greed." I poured coffee into the porcelain cups I'd inherited from my mother. The same cups Victoria used as a little girl after school, the same cups I'd used to serve her hot chocolate when she had nightmares. "You know what hurts the most, George?" I asked, sitting across from him. "It's not losing the house, though, that hurts. It's discovering that the person I loved most in this world, the person I would have given my life for, sees me as a burden." George reached out and covered my hand with his warm, calloused one. "Listen to me, Eleanor. I knew Victoria as a little girl. I saw her grow up. That little girl hasn't disappeared completely. She's buried under the pressures of her marriage and her husband's ambitions. So what do you suggest I do?" George leaned forward, his eyes shining with a determination I hadn't seen in a long time. "I suggest you don't give up so easily. I suggest that if they're going to take 40 years of your life, they should at least know the real price of what they're doing." "I don't understand," George said with a mischievous grin. "You said they could have the house, but you never said anything about what was inside it." I stared at him, his words slowly forming an idea in my mind, an idea that made me smile for the first time all afternoon. "George," I murmured, "I think you're right." "Of course I'm right," he replied with a wider grin. "I didn't get to be 64 by being a fool. Now tell me exactly what's in that house that truly belongs to you." I took out a notebook and started a list. The furniture I had bought and paid for myself over all these years. My grandmother's china, the curtains I had embroidered, the paintings from my travels, the bedding, the towels, the appliances, the books from my personal library, the plants I had nurtured. The list grew longer and longer. George nodded with each item. "And don't forget," he said with a wicked glint in his eye, "everything you put in to improve the house. The air conditioner you installed last year, the bathroom upgrades, the kitchen you completely remodeled 5 years ago." He was right. I had invested not just money, but love into every corner of that house. And if Victoria and Marcus wanted the property, they would have to settle for what was legally theirs, 4 empty walls. But how will I get everything out without them noticing? "Eleanor." George leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "That's what friends are for. And as it happens, I know a guy who owns a moving company." For the first time in hours, I laughed. A real deep laugh. "George," I said, squeezing his hand, "I think Victoria and Marcus are in for a very big surprise next Saturday." "Oh, Eleanor," he replied, winking, "you have no idea. That night I stayed up late, refining the list and making plans. It wasn't revenge I felt, but something pure, justice. And for the first time since Victoria had uttered those terrible words, I felt in control of my own destiny. I woke up the next morning with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in months. It was Monday, and I had exactly 5 days to execute my plan before Marcus and his family arrived on Saturday. After breakfast, I called the number George had given me. Richard, the owner of the moving company, was a warm-voiced man who listened patiently. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, after I explained, "George told me a bit about your situation last night. Don't you worry. We'll handle everything. We can be there tomorrow to do an inventory." "Tomorrow?" The speed surprised me. "Of course, ma'am. Cases like yours, with a certain family urgency, we handle with priority. Besides, George is an old buddy of mine. Anything he needs." That morning, I also called Victoria. My voice was casual, almost cheerful, when I asked if I could go to the beach house to pick up a few personal items. "What things, Mom?" she asked with suspicion. "Oh, just little things, honey. Some photographs, my medication I left in the cabinet, maybe some clothes. I don't want the new occupants to feel uncomfortable finding my stuff lying around." Victoria relaxed immediately. "Oh, right, of course. How thoughtful of you, Mom. Go whenever you want. Just let me know so Marcus doesn't worry if he sees movement at the house." How thoughtful I am, I thought, as I hung up. If only she knew. On Tuesday morning, Richard arrived promptly with his crew. He was a big man in his 50s with huge but surprisingly gentle hands. With him were his 2 sons, Sam and Leo. Strong, polite young men who treated me with a respect I hadn't received from my own family in a long time. The drive to the beach house took 40 minutes. Along the way, Richard told me stories of complicated family moves he'd handled. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, "you're not the first older person to go through this. Families sometimes forget that parents aren't just obstacles to an inheritance. They're human beings with rights and feelings." When we arrived at the house, I felt a pang in my chest. There was my sanctuary, its white walls gleaming, the pink bougainvillea I planted 10 years ago climbing the fence. I opened the door with a trembling hand. The familiar scent hit me, a mix of sea salt, my favourite fabric softener, and that particular smell of home. "My goodness," Sam murmured as we entered. "This place is beautiful, Mrs. Eleanor." He was right. The living room was the result of years of patient searching. The 3-piece cream sofa I bought with my first retirement check. The carved wooden coffee table I found in a little coastal town. The hand-painted ceramic lamps. The embroidered cushions I made on rainy afternoons. "Let's start the inventory," Richard said, pulling out a notebook. "I want you to tell me exactly what goes and what stays." We started in the living room. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every object had a story, and more importantly, a receipt filed away in the box of documents I'd brought with me. Richard took pictures of everything while his sons measured. "And this?" Leo asked, pointing to the air conditioner. "That's coming with me too," I answered firmly. "I had it installed last year. I have the invoice." Richard nodded. "No problem. Sam is an HVAC technician. We'll uninstall it without damaging a thing." We moved to the kitchen. The stove, the refrigerator, the microwave, the complete set of dishes. All of it was mine. Even the custom-made wooden cabinets, the backsplash tile I had picked out myself. "Ma'am," Richard said with genuine admiration, "you really turned this house into a home." In the dining room it was the same story. The 6-person table I inherited from my mother. The chairs I restored myself. The fine crystal in the sideboard. The linen curtains I had embroidered for months. We went upstairs to the bedrooms. In the master, my king-size bed, the matching nightstands, the vanity with a mirror that belonged to my grandmother. "Mrs. Eleanor," Sam touched my arm gently. "Are you okay?" I realized I'd been standing motionless in front of the vanity, remembering all the mornings I'd done my hair there. "Yes, son, just remembering." In the guest room we found more treasures. The twin bed with its hand-knitted quilt, the desk where I used to write letters, the bookcase filled with decades of collected books. The bathroom had been completely remodeled by me 2 years ago. The tiles, the shower, the sink. Everything was mine. "This too?" Leo asked, pointing at the tiles. "Everything. Everything," I confirmed. "I have all the receipts." Richard let out a low whistle. "Mom, when we're done here, this house is going to look like it was just built, bare walls and nothing else." "Exactly as it should be," I replied, with a surprisingly cold smile. We went out to the garden, my plants, my pots, the patio furniture, the grill, the decorative lights. "The plants too?" Sam asked curiously. "Especially the plants. Some of them I grew from clippings from my mother's house. They're over 20 years old." By the end of the day, the list filled 12 pages in Richard's notebook. Practically everything that gave the house life and personality legally belonged to me. "When can we start?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," Richard replied. "But we'll need 3 days to do this right." "Perfect," I said. "That leaves Friday for the final cleaning." "Final cleaning?" Leo asked. "Yes," I replied, my smile turning genuinely malicious. "I don't want anyone to say I left this house dirty. When Marcus and his family arrive on Saturday, they are going to find the cleanest house of their lives. So clean they'll be able to see their reflections in every empty surface." Richard laughed heartily. "Mrs. Eleanor, I like you. It's going to be a pleasure working for you." That night, back home, I called Victoria to let her know I'd been to the house. "Everything okay, Mom?" she asked. "Everything's perfect, honey. I picked up what I needed. The house is ready for Marcus's family." "I'm glad you're being so cooperative," Victoria said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. Cooperative. If only she knew. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my garden. For the first time in days, I felt at peace. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. And after 68 years of always being the one to give in, I was finally doing something just for me. Wednesday dawned clear, as if even the weather was on my side. Richard and his team arrived at 7 a.m. sharp. Let's get started. We began with the garden. Sam and Leo worked with surprising delicacy, unearthing each plant like an archaeological treasure. The begonias I'd grown from seed, the rose bushes from my mother's yard. "Ma'am," Sam said carefully, wrapping the roots of my favourite jasmine. "These plants are beautiful. You can tell you've cared for them with a lot of love." 20 years of care, I replied, stroking a leaf. Some of them know me better than my own family. While they worked outside, I packed the most delicate items inside, every photograph, every little treasure. Around noon, Victoria called. "Mom, how are you doing with your things?" "Great, honey," I replied, watching Richard carefully dismantle my air conditioner. "Just picking up a few last personal items." "Don't take too long. Marcus wants to stop by tomorrow to check that everything is in order for Saturday." Perfect, I thought. We'll be done removing everything by Thursday, and Fridays for cleaning. Marcus is in for an early surprise. "Don't worry, Victoria. I'll be done by tomorrow." When I hung up, Richard shot me a knowing smile. "Your son-in-law is coming tomorrow?" "Yes, to inspect his new property." "Excellent timing," Richard muttered. "By tomorrow afternoon, this place will be spotless." Empty. But spotless. The rest of Wednesday was like a perfectly choreographed ballet. The boys dismantled the bedroom furniture with professional precision. By the end of the day, the house looked dramatically different. The walls showed rectangular ghosts where my paintings had hung. "We'll finish up tomorrow," Richard assured me as they closed the truck. "And on Friday we can come back for the final cleaning." "Yes," I said, looking at the empty windows of my former home. "I want it to be perfect." Thursday was bittersweet. Watching the kitchen I designed with such love being taken apart broke my heart, but at the same time I felt a strange satisfaction. By 3 hours in the afternoon, the transformation was complete. The house was now just an empty shell. "Are you sure about this?" Richard asked, a note of concern in his voice for the first time. "Completely sure," I replied, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. At 4:30, as we were loading the last boxes, I saw Marcus's car turn the corner. My heart sped up, not with fear, but with anticipation. "Ma'am," Sam whispered. "That's him." "Yes," I replied, smoothing my blouse. "I think he's a little early." Marcus parked and got out with that arrogant confidence that always bothered me. "Eleanor," he greeted me, surprised. "I didn't know you were still here." "Hello, Marcus," I replied with my sweetest smile. "Just finishing up with my last few things." His eyes darted to the moving truck, then to Richard and the boys. "A moving company?" he asked with a nervous laugh. "What do you need a moving company for?" "For a few personal items." "Well," I said slowly, savouring his growing confusion. It turned out I had more personal items than I remembered. Marcus frowned and walked toward the front door. I followed along with Richard, who clearly didn't want to miss the show. When Marcus opened the door and stepped inside, his face was a symphony of emotions. First confusion, then dawning realization, and finally a mixture of shock and rage that gave me immense satisfaction. "Where is everything?" he asked, his voice choked. "Everything what?" I replied with angelic innocence. The furniture, the decorations, everything that was here. Oh, that, I said as if I just remembered. Those were my personal things, the ones I came to pick up. Marcus looked at me, as if I'd lost my mind. Eleanor, those weren't your personal things. They were the house's furniture. They were my furniture. I corrected him gently. I bought them. I paid for them. I cared for them for years. I have all the receipts if you'd like to see them. Richard stepped forward, his imposing presence filling the empty space. Sir, everything Mrs. Eleanor took is properly documented. If you'd like to check the receipts. You! Marcus yelled, his voice echoing strangely off the bare walls. This is our house now. Everything in it was included. Included in what? I asked. As far as I know, Victoria only told me you had taken possession of the house. No one mentioned its contents. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed frantically. Victoria, he yelled when she answered. Your mother completely emptied the house. She took everything. Everything. I could hear Victoria's shrill voice on the other end. Marcus paced the empty living room, gesturing wildly. No, you don't understand, he yelled into the phone. There's nothing left, not even the air conditioning. Richard gave me a wink. Sam and Leo watched from the doorway, clearly enjoying the drama. Yes, she's right here, Marcus said, shoving the phone in my face. Talk to your daughter. I took the phone calmly. Hello, Victoria. Mum, what did you do? Victoria's voice was hysterical. I picked up my things just like I said I would, I said. But Marcus says there's nothing left. Well, I said thoughtfully, I guess that means everything that was in the house was mine. How interesting. There was a long silence. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice controlled but furious. Mum, that's not fair. We were counting on the house being furnished. And why would you count on that? I asked. When you took my house without asking, did you also invent a story where all my belongings were yours too? Marcus snatched the phone back. Victoria, you have to do something. The family is arriving on Saturday. We can't have them in an empty house. While he continued his frantic conversation, I calmly walked out. Richard and his sons had finished loading the truck. Mrs. Eleanor, Richard asked, will be back for the cleaning tomorrow. Of course, I replied, taking one last look at the house. I want it to be impeccable for the new occupants. As I got into the car Richard had brought for me, I could still see Marcus gesturing in the empty living room. For the first time in weeks, I genuinely laughed. Ma'am, Richard said as he started the engine, you are my new hero. That evening, Victoria descended on my house like a hurricane. She didn't ring the bell, she used her key, but this time she entered not as a daughter, but as an enemy. I found her in the living room, arms crossed. Mom, she said, her voice trembling with rage. What the hell do you think you're doing? I sat calmly in my favourite armchair. I'm protecting what's mine, I answered. What's yours? Victoria exploded. Mom, you are a selfish, spiteful old woman. The words hit me like a slap, but I kept my composure. Selfish, I repeated softly. I'm selfish for protecting the things I bought with my own money. You knew perfectly well we were counting on that house being furnished, she yelled, pacing like a caged animal. You knew Marcus's family is arriving on Saturday? Yes, I knew, I admitted. I also knew that you took my house without consulting me, using documents I signed when I was sick and vulnerable. Victoria stopped short. For a second, something like guilt crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by more anger. That was for your own good. At your age, you don't need a beach house. At my age, I repeated slowly. Tell me, Victoria, at what exact age does a person stop deserving their own possessions? At what age do they become a burden to their children instead of their mother? Victoria's eyes glistened with tears of frustration, not sadness. Don't be dramatic, Mom. No one said you were a burden. No. I rose slowly from my chair. Then explain to me why my own daughter conspired with her husband to take the house I love most in the world. Explain why you didn't ask me. Explain why you used my illness against me. Because we knew you would object, Victoria shouted, and the truth was finally out. We knew you'd be impossible and make 1,000 excuses. Excuses? The word came out like a venomous whisper. Defending my own property would be making excuses. Just then the doorbell rang. I went to open it and found George standing there, looking worried. Eleanor, he said, glancing past me to Victoria. I heard shouting. Victoria appeared behind me. Hello, Mr. George, she said, with a forced sweetness, trying to put her mask back on. But George had known her since she was a little girl. He wasn't easily fooled. He greeted her coolly. Been a while since I've seen you around here. Yes, well. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. I've been busy. Busy taking your mother's house from what I hear, George said bluntly. Victoria's mask shattered again. That's none of your business, Mr. George. When someone is shouting at my friend next door, it becomes my business, he replied, walking in uninvited and positioning himself clearly on my side. Victoria looked at me as if I had betrayed a family secret. Mum, you told the neighbours our private business. I told my friend that my daughter stole my house. I said with brutal simplicity. We didn't steal anything, Victoria yelled, losing all control. The house is still in your name, we're just using it. Using it, I repeated. And forbidding me from ever showing up there? George whistled softly. Victoria, little girl. I carried you on my shoulders when you were 5. I taught you how to ride a bike. I comforted you when your first boyfriend broke your heart. But this, he shook his head in disgust. This isn't the girl I knew. Victoria turned on him with fire in her eyes. You don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly, George replied gravely. I understand that a 68-year-old woman who spent her life sacrificing for her family is being punished by that same family for the crime of getting old. That's not true. No, George crossed his arms. Then explain why your mother can't use her own house. Victoria opened her mouth, but no sound came out. For the first time she seemed to see what she was doing. It's just Marcus's family is large, and they need, and your mother doesn't need. George interrupted. Your mother doesn't deserve to enjoy what she built. She's already lived her life. Victoria exploded, and the words hung in the air like a death sentence. George and I stood in silence. Victoria seemed to realize the enormity of what she'd said, but it was too late. Victoria, I said softly, do you really believe that? That at 68 years old I no longer deserve moments of happiness? Victoria started to cry, but they were tears of frustration. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? I meant that. She wiped her tears away roughly. We have kids to raise, a future to build. You already raised your daughter. You already built your life. And now it's my turn to step aside so you can build yours on the remains of mine. I finished for her? Yes, Victoria screamed, then covered her mouth. Horrified by her own honesty, George put a protective hand on my shoulder. Eleanor, he said, still looking at Victoria, I think you've heard everything you need to hear. Victoria straightened up, trying to regain some dignity. Mum, you can still fix this. We can reach an agreement. You can visit the house a few times a year when Marcus's family isn't there. The generosity of her offer left me speechless. My own daughter was offering me crumbs from my own property as if it were an extraordinary favour. You know what, Victoria, I said finally. You're right about one thing. I have already lived my life of sacrifice, of putting others first. I have lived that life completely. Victoria smiled, thinking she'd won. But now, I continued, I'm going to live a different life. A life where I don't let anyone, not even my own daughter, treat me like a piece of old furniture that's in the way. The smile vanished from Victoria's face. So no, I'm not going to fix anything. The furniture, the decorations, everything I took from that house is staying with me. If you want the house, you can have it. But you're going to have it exactly as you deserve it. Empty. Victoria looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and rage that broke my heart. But I didn't back down. You are a cruel, vengeful woman, she said, her voice trembling. No, I replied. I'm a woman who finally learned to stand up for herself. Victoria stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows shook. George and I stood in the silence that followed. Eleanor, he asked after a moment, are you okay? I thought about his question as I watched Victoria speed away in her car. You know what? George, I said finally, I think for the first time in a long time, I am perfectly okay. And it was true. My heart ached for the rift with Victoria, but for the first time in years, I felt completely in charge of my own life. Friday dawned with a strange tranquility. I had slept better than I had in weeks. Richard and his sons arrived early as promised, for the final cleaning. Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor. Richard greeted me with a smile. Ready for the grand finale? More than ready, I replied. The trip to the beach house was quiet and comfortable. When we arrived, the house looked just as we had left it, empty but dignified. Where should we start? Leo asked, pulling cleaning supplies from the truck. Wherever you want, I told them. I just want this house to be cleaner than it has ever been. It wasn't revenge. I felt as the boys started working. It was ceremonial. I was preparing the house for a final farewell, closing a chapter of my life with dignity. We started with the windows. Sam left them completely transparent. While he worked, Leo and I cleaned every inch of the walls, removing the ghosts of my paintings, the smudges of years gone by. Mrs. Eleanor, Leo said, scrubbing a stubborn mark, doesn't this make you sad? I stopped and thought about his question. You know what makes me sad, Leo. It's not cleaning these walls. It's discovering that the person I loved most in the world saw me as an obstacle to her happiness. The boy nodded seriously. My grandma always says children forget that parents have hearts too. Your grandmother is a wise woman. We cleaned the kitchen with obsessive care, every remaining cabinet, every surface. Look at this, Richard said, pointing to the bare walls. You can see exactly where everything was. It's like the house is a ghost of its former self. He was right. The clean patches on the floor, where my furniture had been created, a phantom map of the life that had existed there. At noon, as we were cleaning the master bathroom, I heard a car pull up. I looked out and saw Marcus's vehicle. He wasn't alone. Victoria was with him, and I recognized Julia in the back seat. "The family's here," I announced to Richard. "Should we stop?" he asked. "No," I answered firmly. "Let them see us working. Let them see the care I'm taking with their new house." The three of them came in without knocking. I heard them walk through the living room, their footsteps echoing. "My God," I heard Julia exclaim. "She really took everything. I told you," Marcus muttered. "Even the curtains." I kept cleaning the bathroom mirror, watching their reflections. Marcus finally came upstairs. "Eleanor," he said in a controlled voice, "we need to talk." I turned to him, still holding the cleaning rag. "Of course, Marcus. How can I help you?" "This is ridiculous," he said, gesturing at the bare walls. "You can't just take everything and leave us with an empty house." "Why not?" I asked with genuine curiosity. "Everything I took was mine." "But we were counting on it." "And I wasn't counting on keeping my house," I replied softly. Marcus was speechless. Behind him, Victoria appeared in the doorway. "Mom," she said, her voice pleading, "please, we can fix this. We can reach an agreement." "What kind of agreement?" I asked, not breaking my rhythm. "You can keep some of the furniture, the most important pieces. We'll buy the rest and you can come to the house. Let's say one weekend a month." The offer would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetic. My own daughter negotiating access to my own property. "No," I said simply. "No." Marcus looked genuinely shocked, as if the word didn't exist in his vocabulary when directed at me. "No," I repeated, turning to face them. "I will not negotiate for crumbs of what was mine. I will not accept condescending favors from people who stole my sanctuary." "We didn't steal anything," Victoria cried, but her voice was more desperate than angry. "No." I pulled the documents from my purse. "Here is the power of attorney I signed when I was sick." "Show me where it says you could use this document to transfer my property." They exchanged uncomfortable glances. "And here is my will drafted 5 years ago. Show me where it says I wanted to leave this house to my son-in-law's family instead of my own daughter." "Mum, that's different." "Different how?" I interrupted. "You took something that wasn't yours, using documents fraudulently, without my consent. In any court in this country, that's called theft." Richard, who had been cleaning quietly, straightened up at this. Sam and Leo had stopped working and were watching with interest. "Are you threatening to sue us?" Marcus asked in disbelief. "I'm not threatening anything," I answered calmly. "I'm stating facts. You committed fraud. I am protecting what is legally mine." Julia, who had been silent, finally spoke up. "Mrs. Eleanor, you're being very unreasonable. We're family." I turned to her slowly. "Julia, when your brother and my daughter conspired to take my house, where was that family consideration when they decided I was too old to deserve my own possessions? Where was the family respect?" Julia blushed and looked down. "Family," I continued, "is supposed to protect you, not take advantage of you when you're vulnerable." Victoria began to cry, but this time her tears seemed genuine. "Mum, I didn't want it to be like this. I thought it would be better for everyone." "Better for everyone," I repeated softly. "Or better for you?" Victoria couldn't answer. Richard cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, respectfully but firmly. "But we need to finish our work. Mrs. Eleanor hired us to leave this house spotless, and that's what we're going to do. Marcus glared at him. "And who are you to get involved in this?" "I'm someone who respects his elders," Richard replied without flinching. "Something you clearly need to learn." The comment landed like a slap. Marcus turned red with rage, but didn't dare confront the imposing Richard. "Let's go," Marcus said to Victoria. "This is useless." As they walked away, I heard Victoria whisper, "Mum, is there really no way to fix this?" I paused my cleaning and looked her right in the eye. "Yes, Victoria, there is a way." Her eyes lit up with hope. "Give me back my house," I said simply. The hope vanished from her face. Without another word, she followed Marcus downstairs. I heard them leave, their muffled voices arguing in the car. When the engine noise faded, Richard put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, "you are the bravest woman I have ever met." I smiled, feeling a strange peace wash over me. "I'm not brave, Richard. I'm just tired of being invisible." Saturday arrived with a crystal clarity that seemed to mock the coming storm. At 9 a.m, George knocked on my door with a mischievous smile. "Eleanor," he said, holding 2 cups of coffee, "would you care to join me for a drive this morning?" "What kind of drive?" I asked, though I already suspected. "The kind that just so happens to take you past the beach," he replied with false innocence. "To check the traffic, you know." I couldn't help but smile. "George, you're a terrible man." "I'm a curious man," he corrected. "And after the week you've had, I think you deserve to see the end of this story." He was right. The drive was quiet and comfortable. When we reached the residential area, we parked at a safe distance but with a clear view. "There it is," George murmured, pointing at the house, looking perfectly clean and utterly empty. We didn't have to wait long. At 10:30, a caravan of 3 cars arrived. The first was Marcus and Victoria's. The other 2 were packed to the gills with luggage, boxes, and what looked like a desperate last-minute attempt to acquire furniture. "Is that the whole family?" George asked, as about 12 people piled out. "I suppose so," I answered, recognizing some of Marcus's siblings. The first sign of trouble was when Marcus opened the front door and the group froze on the threshold. We could clearly see through the bare windows as the first people inside stopped dead, as if they'd hit an invisible wall. "Where's the furniture?" We heard an older woman, Marcus's mother, shout. "Eleanor took it," Marcus's voice replied, clearly audible in the quiet morning. "Who's Eleanor?" a younger voice asked. "My mother-in-law," Marcus explained with obvious bitterness. George and I exchanged amused glances. Apparently, Marcus hadn't prepared his family. For the next 20 minutes, we witnessed a spectacle that was part comedy, part tragedy. Relatives walked in and out of the house with growing confusion. Kids ran through the empty rooms, their shouts echoing strangely, without carpets or curtains to absorb the sound. "Marcus!" A woman who looked like his older sister yelled, "You told us the house was fully equipped." "It was," Marcus answered defensively. "My mother-in-law emptied it." "And you couldn't stop her." There was a long silence, during which Marcus was presumably trying to explain how he'd lost a battle against a 68-year-old woman. "This is incredible," George murmured in admiration. "You're going to make them sleep on the floor." "Not all of them," I replied. I saw some sleeping bags in one of the cars. We watched as Julia led a group of children to the backyard, likely to escape the chaos inside. The adults formed what looked like a war council in the empty living room, their voices rising and falling in a heated argument. "What are we going to do for food, Achai?" we heard someone ask. "There's a grill in the back," Marcus answered hopefully. "With what charcoal?" Another voice shot back. "With what plates? What silverware?" The silence that followed was eloquent. "I think," George said, holding back a laugh, "your son-in-law didn't think this through." At 11:30, we saw Marcus run to his car. He returned an hour later with bags of emergency supplies, paper plates, plastic cups, a tiny portable grill. "Oh, Marcus," I murmured, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. "This is what happens when you count your chickens before they hatch." By noon, the heat began to intensify. The house, without air conditioning, apparently became unbearable. We saw them open all the windows and doors. "Without the curtains you sewed," George observed, "that house must be an oven right now." He was right. I had designed the curtain system specifically to block the harsh midday sun. By 1 p.m. we saw the first deserters, 2 couples with young children packed up and left, their voices loaded with frustration as they argued with Marcus before driving off. "They're leaving," I observed. "The smart ones always leave first," George commented wisely. Victoria appeared at the front door, talking agitatedly on her phone. "I bet she's trying to rent furniture," George said. "On a Saturday this last minute," I replied. "It'll cost a fortune if she can find anything at all." At 2 p.m, a rental truck arrived. My hopes for Victoria's quick fix vanished when I saw what they unloaded: a few plastic folding chairs, 2 card tables, and what looked like a couple of air mattresses. "That won't be enough for even half of them," I observed. "No," George agreed, "and it's going to cost a fortune for 1 week." Sure enough, half an hour later, more people were packing up and leaving. By 3 p.m, only Marcus, Victoria, Julia, and Marcus's parents remained, looking deeply uncomfortable in the plastic chairs under the unforgiving sun. "The old folks are always the last to leave," George murmured. "They don't want to admit the plan failed." By 4, even they had had enough. We watched them load their bags with expressions of clear disappointment. "Marcus," we heard his mother yell, "next time you invite us somewhere, make sure you actually have a suitable place for us." When they left, only Marcus, Victoria, and Julia remained in the empty house. We could see them sitting on the plastic chairs in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the few things they had brought for what was supposed to be a triumphant family vacation. "You know what's most ironic about all this?" I asked George. "What's that?" "If they had just come to me and talked to me like adults, like family, I probably would have been willing to share the house with them. But they chose to take it by force." George nodded. "Pride and greed make people do the stupidest things." At 5 p.m, as the sun began to set, we finally saw a decisive movement. Victoria came out and started loading their few remaining things back into the car. "They're giving up," George announced with satisfaction. "Already?" I asked, feigning surprise. "But it's only their first day in their new vacation home." George laughed. "Eleanor, you're diabolical." "No," I replied, watching Marcus help with the last bags, his defeated posture evident even from a distance. "I'm a woman who finally learned that sometimes justice comes in unexpected ways." When the last car drove away, George and I sat in silence for several minutes. "Now what?" he finally asked. I looked at the house that had been my sanctuary for 40 years, now empty and abandoned, like a theatre after the final performance. Now, I said, I start the next chapter of my life. The days following the great family weekend fiasco were strangely quiet. Victoria didn't call, didn't visit, didn't text. It was as if she had decided I no longer existed, but I wasn't sitting still. On Monday morning, Richard came to my house with a proposal. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said over coffee, "what are you going to do with all that furniture from the beach house?" It was a good question. My things were sitting in a storage unit. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I'll have to sell some of it." "Sell it to who?" Richard asked with a smile that told me he had an idea. "I don't know. People who need used furniture." "How about people who need furniture urgently?" His smile widened. "People who, let's say, just moved into an empty house and found they have nothing to fill it with." I stared at him, processing his suggestion. "Richard, are you suggesting what I think you are?" "I'm suggesting that you have something they desperately need, and they have something you might want." "What do they have that I could possibly want?" "Your house back," he said simply. The idea was so audacious I was speechless. "But how?" I finally asked. "Easy. You sell them the furniture, but with conditions. The price includes not just the furniture, but a shared use agreement for the house." "Shared use?" "Yes. Say they get the house for the summers, and you get it for the rest of the year. The details can be negotiated." "But Richard," I protested, "that house is already mine. Why should I have to negotiate for the use of my own property?" "Because," Richard said with a pragmatism I admired, "sometimes it's better to win the war piece by piece than to lose all the battles trying to be totally right." His words gave me pause. "What if they don't accept?" I asked. "Mrs. Eleanor?" Richard leaned back confidently. "After what they went through on Saturday, they will accept anything you offer. They're desperate." That afternoon, against all my instincts, I called Victoria. "Mum," her voice was cautious. "Victoria," I said as neutrally as I could. "I heard the weekend didn't go as planned." There was a long silence. Finally, Victoria sighed. "No, it didn't." "Do you want to talk about it?" "What for, Mom? So you can say I told you so?" "No," I answered honestly. "To see if we can find a solution that works for everyone." Another long pause. "What kind of solution?" "Why don't you come over tomorrow? We can talk like adults." "Are you going to yell at me?" The question broke my heart. "Victoria, I have never yelled at you in your life." "I know," she murmured. "I was the one who yelled at you the other night." "Yes," I confirmed softly. "You were." On Tuesday afternoon, Victoria arrived looking exhausted, as if the last few days had taken a heavy toll. "Hello, Mom," she greeted me in a small voice. "Hello, honey. Want some coffee?" "Yes, please." I prepared it in silence while Victoria sat at the kitchen table in the same chair she'd used for years as a child. "Victoria," I said after serving her, "tell me what really happened on Saturday." Victoria sighed deeply. "It was a disaster, Mum. A complete disaster." She told me about the humiliation, the complaining kids, the astronomical cost of the emergency rentals. Marcus's mother told me I was the most irresponsible hostess she'd ever met. Victoria concluded, tears in her eyes. And she was right. "Was she?" I asked gently. "Yes, Mom. I should have known you can't offer something you don't have." "Victoria," I said carefully, "you knew I furnished that house over decades. Did you really think that furniture was just automatically included?" She was quiet for a long time. I guess I never really thought about it. To me, the house was always furnished. As if I were part of the furniture, I asked, not with sarcasm, but with genuine curiosity. Victoria looked at me with tear-filled eyes. Mom, I never wanted to hurt you. I genuinely thought it was for the best, for everyone. And I repeated, or for Marcus and his family. For everyone, she insisted, but her voice wasn't convincing even to her. Victoria, I said, leaning forward, do you know the difference between what you did and what I did? She shook her head. You took something that wasn't yours without asking. I protected something that was mine. You acted in secret. I acted openly. You assumed I had no rights. I exercised the rights I legally have. Victoria nodded slowly, as if she was finally beginning to understand. Is there any way to fix this? She asked in a small voice. Maybe, I replied, but it's going to require all of us to be honest. What do you mean? I mean you obviously need furniture for that house, and I have the exact furniture you need. Victoria's eyes lit up with cautious hope. But, I continued, I'm not giving it to you, and I will not accept being excluded from a house that is still legally mine. What do you propose? I'll sell you all the furniture I took from the house, but the price includes more than just money. What else? Access, shared use of the house, a schedule where we can divide the time fairly. Victoria frowned, processing the proposal. How much money? She finally asked. $50,000, I said, naming a figure that was fair but significant. Victoria choked on her coffee. Mom, that's a lot of money. Victoria, I said calmly, it's less than new furniture of that quality would cost. It's less than Marcus will spend trying to furnish that house from scratch. And it's less than you'll spend on hotel rentals if you don't have a decent place for your family. I could see the moment she realized I was right. And the shared use? 6 months for you, 6 months for me, or we can split weekends, whatever arrangement is fair to both of us. She was quiet for several minutes. I have to talk to Marcus, she said finally. Of course, I replied, but Victoria, this offer has an expiration date. If I don't hear from you by Friday, I'm selling the furniture to someone else, and you can figure it out on your own. You'd really do that? Victoria, I said, looking her right in the eye. After everything that's happened, do you really doubt that I will do exactly what I say I will do? For the first time in the conversation, Victoria smiled, a small but genuine smile. No, she admitted, I don't doubt that any more. When she left, I wondered if I'd done the right thing. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was a step toward reconciliation without sacrificing my dignity. For the first time in weeks, I had hope. On Thursday night, Victoria called. Mom, she said, her voice sounding different, more mature. We accept your proposal. I felt a mix of relief and satisfaction. All the terms. Marcus is transferring the money tomorrow, and we want to talk to you about the shared use calendar. Very good, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. When do you want Richard to bring the furniture back? Would Saturday be okay? Marcus's family wants to try the weekend again. I laughed softly. Of course, Victoria, but this time they're going to have a very different experience. Friday morning, the money appeared in my bank account. 50,000 tons that represented so much more than monetary value. It was the price of my dignity, the cost of being taken seriously. That afternoon, Victoria and Marcus came over to discuss the schedule. Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Eleanor," he said upon entering, "I want to apologize for how we handled this whole situation." "How you handled it, Marcus?" I asked, wanting to hear him say the words. "I handled it badly," he admitted, looking at the floor. "We shouldn't have used the power of attorney that way. We shouldn't have assumed the furniture was included. We shouldn't have excluded you from your own house." "No," I agreed, "you shouldn't have." We sat down and spread a calendar on the coffee table. For the next hour we divided the year in a way that gave each family equitable access. "The summers will be shared," I stated firmly. "1 week for you, 1 week for me. The winters will be mostly mine, since you prefer tropical vacations anyway." Victoria nodded. "That seems fair." "And," I added, "when either of us has guests, the other party gets at least 2 weeks' notice." "Agreed," Marcus said, and for the first time since I'd known him, his agreement sounded genuine. On Saturday morning, George and I returned to the beach house, not as spies, but as part of the official process. Richard and his sons were already there, carefully unloading every piece of furniture, every piece of life that had been torn from those walls. "Mrs. Eleanor," Sam said as he carried my favourite sofa, "it feels good to bring these things back home, doesn't it?" "Yes," I replied, watching my house slowly come back to life. "It feels like it's breathing again." Victoria arrived mid-morning with coffee and pastries for everyone. "It was a small but significant gesture, Mom," she said as we watched Leo reinstall my air conditioner. "Do you think we can ever be a normal family again?" "Victoria," I replied, hanging one of my favourite paintings in its usual spot. "We were never a normal family, but maybe we can be an honest one." By noon the house was completely restored. It was as if the past 2 months had been a strange nightmare. "It's beautiful," George murmured, looking at the fully furnished living room. "It's hard to believe it was ever empty." Marcus arrived with his family just as Richard was finishing. This time their expressions were of genuine amazement and gratitude. "My goodness," Marcus's mother exclaimed, the same woman who had been so harsh last week. "This is absolutely perfect." The children ran to the garden, delighted to see the plants and patio furniture back in place. The adults settled comfortably on the sofas, commenting on the quality, the attention to detail. "Eleanor," Marcus's father said to me, "your home is beautiful. Thank you for sharing it with us." For sharing it, not giving it to us, not letting us use it. Sharing it. Those 2 words made all the difference. That afternoon, as Marcus's family settled in, Victoria and I walked along the beach. "Mum," Victoria said as the waves lapped at our feet, "I learned something important from all of this." "What did you learn?" "I learned that treating someone like they're invisible doesn't make them disappear. It just makes them stronger." I smiled, feeling the sea breeze on my face. "That's a valuable lesson, honey." "I also learned," she continued, "that my mother is a lot smarter and tougher than I ever thought." "I was always smart and tough," I replied softly. "I just never had to prove it so dramatically." We walked in silence for several minutes. "Will you forgive me?" Victoria finally asked. "I've already forgiven you," I replied. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I forget. It means I trust that you've learned from your mistakes. Do you trust me?" "I'm learning to trust you again," I said honestly. "But Victoria, if something like this ever happens again, I won't be so generous next time." Victoria nodded seriously. It won't happen again, Mom, I promise. That evening, George and I had dinner at our favourite little seafood restaurant. We toasted with white wine as the sun set over the sea. 2 battles well fought, George said, raising his glass. To lessons well learned, I replied, clinking my glass against his. You know what's most interesting about this whole situation? George asked. What? In the end, everyone won something. Victoria learned to respect her mother. Marcus learned that actions have consequences. You got your dignity and your house back, and the family has a beautiful place to vacation. And what did you win? I asked. George smiled, that mischievous smile I'd grown to love. I won the satisfaction of seeing my favourite neighbour fight back like the warrior I always knew she was. A month later, I was sitting on my favourite terrace at the beach house reading a book. It was Tuesday, my day, my time, my peace. I heard footsteps on the sand and looked up to see an older woman walking along the beach, just as I used to. She looked alone, but not sad. She looked free. She reminded me of myself just a few weeks ago, when I thought my life was over. I stood up and walked to the shore. Good morning, I called out to her. She approached with a smile. Good morning. Are you the owner of that beautiful house? I'm one of the owners, I replied, and the words tasted like victory. Would you like to come up for a coffee? I'd love that, she responded, as I prepared coffee for 2 in my fully restored kitchen. I thought about everything that had happened. Victoria was right. I had learned I was stronger than I thought. But I had also learned that it's never too late to write a new chapter in your own story. I had learned that dignity isn't something others give you, but something you choose to keep. And I had learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't the pain you cause others, but the happiness you decide to create for yourself. I served the coffee in the porcelain cups from my mother, the same cups Victoria used as a child, the same cups I would now use to welcome new friends into my reclaimed home. So, I said to my new friend as we sat on my terrace, tell me about yourself. Are you enjoying your freedom? She laughed. How did you know I was free? Because, I replied, raising my cup in a silent toast to the endless sea. I recognize a woman who's finally decided to live for herself. And so, sitting on my terrace in my house, on my time, with the sea stretching out before me, I knew I had done more than just get my furniture back. I had gotten my life back.